subscribe to the channel. It's easy and fast.
The Thompsons' home in Asheville, North Carolina, glowed with the warmth of an October evening. Outside, the Blue Ridge Mountains loomed under a sky streaked with crimson and gold, while inside, the living room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the crackle of a stone fireplace. Julian Carter, 40, sat on a beige sofa, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching his wife Camilla move through the crowd with effortless grace. Her auburn hair caught the chandelier's light, and her dark eyes sparkled as she laughed, drawing people in like moths to a flame. At 38, Camilla was magnetic, charismatic, ambitious, the kind of woman who could command a room without trying. Julian, by contrast, was reserved, his quiet strength a counterpoint to her vibrancy. He'd always been content to let her shine, happy to be the steady hand that anchored her light. They'd been married for 10 years, their love story beginning at a fundraiser for the Asheville Public Library. Camilla, then a junior marketing assistant, had been selling raffle tickets with a smile that stopped Julian in his tracks. He was a project manager for a local construction firm, steady and dependable, and he'd bought 10 tickets just to keep her talking. That night, her energy had captivated him, her dreams of a big career, her infectious laugh, the way she made the world feel alive. Now, watching her charm their friends and colleagues, Julian still felt that pull, though it was tinged with a quiet unease he couldn't name. The Thompsons' living room blended modern elegance with rustic charm, exposed wooden beams, a sleek leather sectional, and a coffee table cluttered with craft beer bottles and wine glasses. About 20 people filled the space, mostly Camilla's co-workers from her marketing firm, mixed with neighbors and friends. Julian knew them casually. Matt Thompson, the jovial host who owned a craft brewery downtown. Sarah, his wife, a high school history teacher with a knack for throwing lively gatherings. And Ethan Brooks, a co-worker of Camilla's whose polished charm always felt calculated. Ethan's tailored blazers and easy smiles made Julian uneasy, like the man was always performing for an audience only he could see. "All right, everyone, time to spice things up." Sarah clapped her hands, her eyes gleaming with mischief. She held a stack of index cards, each with a question designed to spark laughter or mild embarrassment. "We're playing Spill the Tea, Truth or Dare for grown-ups. Answer the question or take a shot of tequila." The room erupted in playful groans and cheers. Julian caught Camilla's eye, and she winked, her expression teasing. He sipped his bourbon, relaxing slightly. These games were her territory, not his, but he'd play along for her sake. The game started innocently. Matt confessed to stealing a rival college's mascot costume in his youth, earning roars of laughter. Sarah admitted to faking a cold to binge-watch a true crime series, which got knowing nods. Camilla drew a card and read, "What's the most embarrassing thing you've ever done to impress someone?" She laughed, tossing her hair. "In college, I tried to impress this guy by pretending I was into rock climbing. Got halfway up an indoor wall, had a total panic attack, and had to be rescued by the staff. He never called me back." The room howled, and Julian smiled, remembering how she'd shared that story on their third date, her cheeks flushed with laughter. It was one of the moments that made her human, not just the polished woman everyone else saw. As the tequila bottle circled, the questions grew bolder. Ethan's card asked about his worst date, and he spun a tale about a woman who brought her pet snake to dinner, which had everyone in stitches. Julian's turn came, and his question was simple. "What's your biggest pet peeve?" He paused, then said, "People who don't listen, really listen. It's disrespectful." His answer was quiet, earnest, and the group moved on quickly. Then Camilla drew another card. Her lips curved into a sly smile as she read, "If you could trade your partner for someone else in this room, who would it be?" The room hushed, then burst into playful jeers and gasps. Julian's stomach tightened, but he brushed it off. It was just a game. Camilla's eyes scanned the circle, her smile widening as if she relished the spotlight. She leaned back, one leg crossed over the other, and pointed at Ethan. "Ethan!" she said, her voice clear, almost defiant. No contest. Laughter and gasps exploded. Ethan raised his hands in mock surrender, grinning like he'd won a prize. Sarah clapped, delighted by the drama, while Matt whistled. Julian froze, his bourbon glass heavy in his hand. The laughter felt like a spotlight, and he was the only one not in on the joke. Camilla glanced at him, her smile faltering for a split second, but she didn't backtrack. She shrugged as if to say, "It's just a game." But Julian's chest burned, the air thinning. He set his glass down, the clink cutting through the noise. "Julian, your turn," Sarah said, oblivious. "Who would you trade Camilla for?" The room turned to him, expectant. Julian stood, his movements slow, deliberate. His face was calm, but his eyes were steel. He looked at Camilla, then Ethan, then the group. "I wouldn't trade her," he said, his voice low but carrying weight. "Because marriage isn't a game of trades. It's about respect. And when someone disrespects you in front of everyone you know, it's not a joke, it's a choice." The room fell silent. Camilla's smile vanished, her face paling. Ethan's grin faded, and he shifted uncomfortably. Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came. Julian's calm was more piercing than any outburst. "I'm done for the night," he said, grabbing his jacket. He looked at Camilla one last time, his expression unreadable. "You should stay. Enjoy the game." He walked out, the front door closing softly. The silence lingered, heavy and suffocating, until someone coughed and Sarah tried to restart the game. But the mood was shattered, and so was something deeper, something Julian wasn't sure could be mended. Julian drove through Asheville's streets, the city alive with tourists spilling from breweries and street musicians strumming for tips. His old Ford pickup rattled, the leather steering wheel worn smooth under his hands. He didn't turn on the radio. The silence let him feel the full weight of Camilla's words. "Ethan, no contest." It wasn't just the words. It was her confidence, the way she'd leaned into the moment without a glance to reassure him. She'd chosen Ethan, a man Julian had always sensed she admired too much, and she'd done it in front of their world. He pulled into the driveway of their craftsman-style home, a 2-story house they'd bought after Camilla's promotion 5 years ago. The porch light glowed, illuminating her marigold beds, their vibrant orange a stark contrast to the grayness settling in his chest. Julian sat in the truck, staring at the house that was supposed to be their haven. It felt like a stranger's now. Inside, he poured another bourbon and sat at the dining table, the wood scarred from years of shared meals. He tried to trace when things had shifted. Their early days had been electric, dancing in their tiny apartment kitchen, her head on his shoulder during late-night talks about their future. They'd dreamed of a life together, not just her career. But as Camilla climbed the ladder at the marketing firm, her world had expanded, filled with late-night meetings and colleagues like Ethan who matched her ambition. Julian had stayed steady, managing construction projects, celebrating her wins, even when it meant sidelining his own dreams, like the woodworking shop he'd once hoped to open. Had he become invisible to her? The front door opened an hour later. Camilla's heels clicked, then stopped in the dining room doorway. Her purse hung from her shoulder, her face flushed, eyes wary. "Julian," she said softly, almost pleading, "can we talk?" He looked up, his expression hard. "You had plenty to say earlier." She flinched, setting her purse down and pulling out a chair. "It was a stupid game. I didn't mean anything by it. You know that, do I?" His voice was calm, but it cut, because it didn't feel like a game. It felt like you meant it. Camilla's hands twisted in her lap, her confidence gone. "I was just playing along. Everyone was laughing. I didn't think—" "That's the problem," he interrupted, leaning forward. "You didn't think about what it would feel like for me to hear you'd trade me for Ethan. In front of everyone. You didn't think about what that says about us." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I'd never want to hurt you." "Then why say it?" His gaze was unrelenting. "Why him?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, searching for words. "It was just a name," she said finally. "It didn't mean anything." Julian leaned back, his jaw tight. "It meant something to me." Silence stretched between them. Julian wanted to believe her, but the words kept echoing, each one a reminder of a truth he hadn't wanted to face. Maybe Camilla didn't value him the way he'd valued her. "I need time," he said, standing. "I'm sleeping in the guest room." Her tears spilled, but she didn't argue. She nodded, watching him walk away. The next morning, Julian woke to the smell of coffee, but it wasn't the same. Camilla had left early, a note on the counter. "I'm sorry. Let's talk tonight. I love you." He crumpled it, the words feeling hollow. At work, Julian tried to focus on blueprints and schedules at the construction firm, but his mind wandered. He remembered their first year together, when Camilla would leave sticky notes on his lunchbox, silly messages like, "Don't let the concrete bury you." That made him smile through long days on job sites. Back then, she'd been a dreamer, talking about building a life together, not just a career. They'd spent weekends hiking the Blue Ridge trails. Her laughter echoing through the trees as they planned a future with kids, a dog, a house like the one they had now. But as her career took off, those moments faded. She'd started staying late at the firm, coming home with stories of Ethan's latest pitch or the team's happy hours. Julian had listened, proud of her, but he'd felt the distance growing, like a crack in a foundation he hadn't noticed until it was too wide to ignore. Camilla's day was worse. At the marketing firm, the party had become office gossip. Colleagues whispered when she entered the break room, their eyes darting away when she looked. Ethan avoided her in meetings, his usual charm replaced by awkward glances. Her boss, Linda, pulled her aside, her tone more curious than concerned. "Everything okay, Camilla? People are talking about the party." Camilla forced a smile. "Just a misunderstanding." "It's fine." But it wasn't. She'd always been the star, confident, creative, untouchable. Now she felt exposed, her mistake laid bare. She remembered the early days with Julian, painting their first apartment's walls, laughing when paint ended up in her hair. He'd been her rock, believing in her when she doubted herself. But as her career soared, she'd leaned into the validation of her colleagues, especially Ethan, whose ambition and charisma mirrored her own. Had she let that blind her to Julian's quiet strength? Had she started to see him as less because he didn't chase the same spotlight? That evening, she found Julian in the backyard, tending the fire pit. The sky was streaked with pink, the air cool with the promise of fall. He didn't look up as she approached. "Julian," she said, stepping closer, "can we try again?" He poked the fire, sparks rising. "I don't know what there is to say. You made a choice and I heard it." "It wasn't a choice," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It was a thoughtless moment. I'd never trade you. I love you." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "Then why did it feel so true? Why does it feel like you've been looking at me like I'm not enough for a long time?" Her breath caught. His words hit too close. Had she taken him for granted, chasing the next promotion, the next laugh from Ethan? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "But I want to fix it." "Some things can't be fixed with words," he said, staring into the fire. "Some things change everything." The weeks that followed were a study in distance. Julian and Camilla lived under the same roof, but the warmth was gone. They ate dinner together, but the conversations were polite, strained, like strangers sharing a table. Julian threw himself into work, taking on extra projects to avoid the house. He'd always been good at his job, managing timelines, solving problems, but now it was an escape, a way to silence the questions looping in his mind. Had Camilla ever seen him as an equal? Had he been too willing to fade into her shadow, supporting her dreams while his own, a woodworking shop, a simpler life, gathered dust? Camilla's world was unraveling too. At the firm, the gossip didn't fade. She overheard a co-worker joke about Camilla's crush on Ethan, and it stung more than she'd expected. Ethan, for his part, tried to smooth things over with his usual charm. "Don't let it get to you," he said one day at lunch, flashing a smile. It was just a dumb game. But his eyes darted away, and Camilla saw the truth. Even he was embarrassed. She thought she was being clever, playing the game with the same boldness that had earned her respect at work. Now she realized she'd miscalculated. Her colleagues' whispers followed her, and Linda's scrutiny grew sharper, her feedback laced with subtle warnings about professionalism. Camilla started to see herself through Julian's eyes, a woman who'd let ambition and attention cloud her judgment, who'd hurt the one person who'd always been her anchor. She tried to make amends at home. She cooked Julian's favorite lasagna, left notes on his pillow, even suggested a weekend hike like they used to do. But her efforts felt hollow to him, like gestures from someone trying to rewrite a story that had already ended. One night, as they sat in silence over dinner, Julian spoke. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "Maybe you were right. Maybe I'm not what you want." Camilla's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying what you said that night wasn't just a joke. It was a truth you didn't mean to let slip. And I can't keep pretending it didn't happen." He looked at her, his eyes raw with pain. "If you think someone like Ethan is better for you, then maybe you never deserved me." The words hit like a physical blow. Camilla's tears spilled, but she couldn't respond. Deep down, she knew he was right, not about Ethan, but about her. She'd taken him for granted, assumed he'd always be there no matter how she treated him. Now she was losing him. Julian stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to stay with my brother for a while," he said. "I need space to figure out what I want." She didn't beg him to stay. She didn't have the right. She watched him pack a bag and walk out the door, his quiet dignity cutting deeper than any argument. Julian moved in with his brother Mark in Charlotte, an hour's drive from Asheville. Mark's apartment was a cluttered bachelor pad, sports gear in one corner, half-read books in another, but it was welcoming. Mark didn't pry, but he listened when Julian finally opened up over beers one night. "You did the right thing," Mark said, cracking open a bottle. "You can't stay with someone who doesn't respect you." Julian nodded, but the ache remained. He missed Camilla, not the woman who'd humiliated him, but the one he'd fallen in love with. He remembered their first winter together, when a snowstorm had trapped them in their apartment. They'd built a blanket fort, laughing like kids as they shared stories of their childhoods, hers in a loud, chaotic family in Raleigh, his in a quiet suburb of Greensboro. They'd promised to always be honest, to always choose each other. Where had that promise gone? He threw himself into new routines. He started hiking again, trekking the rugged trails of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the solitude grounding him. He remembered how he and Camilla used to hike these paths, her hand in his as they talked about their dreams. Now the trails were his alone, and he found a strange comfort in it. He also began volunteering at a community center in Charlotte, teaching woodworking to kids. The work reminded him of his father, who taught him to carve when he was young, and it rekindled a spark he'd buried, his dream of a woodworking shop, a place to create something tangible, lasting. Camilla, meanwhile, was facing her own reckoning. She started therapy, determined to understand why she'd said Ethan's name. Her therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Ellis, pushed her to confront uncomfortable truths. "Why Ethan?" Dr. Ellis asked in their first session. "What did saying his name give you?" Camilla struggled to answer. Ethan's attention had flattered her, his ambition mirroring her own. In the high-stakes world of the firm, his approval had felt like a measure of her worth. But it wasn't about Ethan, she realized. It was about her own insecurities, her need to be seen as more than Julian's wife, more than the woman who'd once been happy with a simpler life. She'd let that need blind her to what she had. She wrote Julian letters, not expecting him to read them, but needing to put her regret into words. She described their early days, how his quiet strength had made her feel safe, how his belief in her had pushed her to chase her dreams. She admitted her mistakes, not just the party, but the years of taking him for granted, of letting her ambition overshadow their partnership. At the firm, she worked to repair her reputation. She apologized to her colleagues, owned her mistake, and distanced herself from Ethan, who seemed all too happy to let the incident fade. But the damage lingered. Linda's trust in her wavered, and projects she'd once led were reassigned. Camilla realized she'd been chasing a version of success that didn't fulfill her, and it had cost her the one person who truly mattered. 6 months later, Julian was finding his footing. The community center had become a second home, the kids' laughter a balm for his wounds. One boy, a shy 12-year-old named Caleb, reminded him of himself, quiet, thoughtful, eager to create. Julian taught him to carve a small bird, the same way his father had taught him, and the pride in Caleb's eyes mirrored his own rediscovered sense of purpose. He'd read Camilla's letters, though he hadn't responded. They sat in a drawer, their words heavy with honesty. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for a chance to prove she'd changed. Julian wasn't ready to decide what that meant, but he felt the pull of their shared history, the years of love, loss, and quiet moments that had defined them. One day, Camilla appeared at Mark's apartment. She looked different, less polished, her hair in a simple ponytail, her eyes vulnerable. She handed him a letter, her hands trembling. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," she said, "but I'm trying to be someone who might. Read it when you're ready." Julian carried the letter for days, unsure if he wanted to open it. When he did, he found pages of raw honesty, her flaws, her regret, her commitment to change. She wrote about their miscarriage, a loss they'd rarely discussed, and how she'd buried her grief in work, pushing him away when she should have held him closer. She wrote about the party, admitting that Ethan's name had slipped out because she'd been chasing a fleeting sense of power, not because she wanted him. She ended with a simple plea. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking you to see that I'm trying to be better." Julian didn't respond immediately. He needed time not just to heal, but to understand who he was without her. He'd spent so long being Camilla's husband that he'd forgotten how to be Julian, alone, whole, enough. 9 months after the party, Julian and Camilla met for coffee at a small cafe in Asheville, nestled among art galleries and breweries. The Blue Ridge Mountains loomed in the distance, a reminder of the trails they'd once walked together. It wasn't a reconciliation, but a conversation. They talked about the past, their first date, their miscarriage, the years of love and drift. Camilla was different. Humbler, more introspective, her ambition tempered by self-awareness. Julian was too, stronger, more sure of his worth, no longer willing to fade into her shadow. "I've been seeing a therapist," Camilla said, stirring her coffee. "I'm learning why I did what I did. It wasn't about Ethan, it was about me. I was scared I wasn't enough, so I chased things that made me feel bigger. But I lost you in the process." Julian nodded, his expression guarded but soft. "I've been figuring out who I am without you," he said. "I spent so long being your support that I forgot how to be me. I'm not ready to trust again, but I'm here, talking. That's something." They didn't rush to rebuild. Julian needed space to heal, and Camilla needed to prove her change was real. But as they sat across from each other, the mountains watching over them, there was a flicker of hope, not for the past, but for something new. A year later, Julian and Camilla were still apart, but they were building a fragile bridge. They met weekly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for hikes, talking as two people learning to understand what they'd lost and what they might salvage. Julian had started plans for his woodworking shop, a dream he was finally chasing. Camilla had taken a step back at work, focusing on projects that fulfilled her, not just impressed others. The words from that night, "Ethan, no contest," still lingered, but they were no longer the only ones that mattered. Julian's quiet dignity had changed them both, and while the future was uncertain, it was no longer defined by the words that broke them.
Subscribe to the channel. It's easy and fast.